Some days it's really easy to do this and show you the overarching big story. Today is not one of them. There are about 10 big stories vying for my attention here, so I'm going to just kind of push through them very quickly. So first, Putin is talking about if the U.S. hands over Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, hey, we're not going to have good relations, and that's because he fears that he's going to that the Tomahawks are going to create an escalation, and that's going to degrade Russia's military position. Here's what he had to say. I've already said that this would lead to the destruction of our relations, at least with the United States. He's talking about at least the positive tendencies that had begun to emerge in them. So he's worried about Tomahawks and what Tomahawks would be able to do inside Russia. Darth Putin, the humorist, said, inform the West that if they give Ukraine any aid or artillery or javelins or HIMARS or NASAMS or tanks or Storm Shadow or F-16s or TACMs or Patriots, and now we're on the 11th with Tomahawks, it's definitely World War III this time. Okay, so again, that's an interesting way of saying, look, he's trying to draw a red line, and they're just going to cross it. I think, I'm not sure exactly when, but I think they will. Okay, second big story. Czech ex-president our ex-prime minister Andrej Babis is back, and Ukraine might lose a valuable or vital ally. Prague now risks turning toward Orbán and Fico, cutting military aid to Kyiv, all while Babis is on trial for EU fraud. Babis is an interesting figure, and I think that he's going to be either bad or neutral for Ukraine. I don't know that he'll be good for Ukraine. The ANO government leads with no majority. Babis wants to govern alone. With over 90% of the votes in, Babis's ANO, that's the Action of Dissatisfied Citizens Party, had secured about 35% of the vote. Look, he's a populist. Even the title, the name of his party, Action of Dissatisfied Citizens, is way populist. If you understand how populism works, it kind of works like Trump in the United States. So it makes sense that he's doing the things that he's doing. Babis's campaign heavily emphasized ending Czech participation in military aid to Ukraine. During the vote, he promised to review Prague's international initiative to supply artillery shells to Kyiv, launched by the Fiala's government, and said that he might discuss it with President Zelensky. He claimed to support peace and called himself a peacemonger, right? We don't want to be involved in those wars over there. It's Czech first. That Czech first rhetoric mirrors the U.S. President Donald Trump's slogan. Trump is a populist, not a conservative, but a populist, and so he acts in a particular way. Babis is also facing trial over alleged fraud in EU subsidies worth over $2 million. So we'll see how he governs. A little bit about his biography. This is just some commentary somebody put out there. This isn't from an official news source, but it helps us understand a little bit. He's the son of a highly placed Communist Party official. While Soviet tanks were rolling through Prague in 1968, his family was part of the 1% communist elite. In his early 30s, he ran a state company that traded abroad. In the early 90s, he rebranded as a capitalist and started a business empire with money that came out of nowhere, likely money redirected from state companies. We have a problem in Eastern Europe. We keep electing people who robbed us in communism or worked for the security services that kept us down. In this case, Czech seemed to have elected someone who did both. Okay, maybe that's a harsh commentary, maybe that's fair, but gives you a little bit of a perspective. This is from Anton Gerashenko. This previous source I don't know, and so I'm taking with a grain of salt. Anton Gerashenko I do know, and I think he's a fairly reliable source. Czechia's ANO party, led by former President Andrej Babis, has won the October 3rd to 4th parliamentary elections with about 35%. Speaking about Czech support for Ukraine, Mr. Babis said, I met Zelensky 3 times, even in November 2019, and I support him after the annexation of Crimea. So we are helping Ukraine through the EU. The EU is helping Ukraine, and it's within European budget, next budget, and we are paying a lot of money to the European budget. And this is the way how we continue to help. So I think what he's saying there is that we're going to help him through that. We might not help him in other ways. That's what I'm taking away. What about the ammunition initiative for Ukraine that the Czechs founded? It should be transparent, and if there is a war, nobody should make money because of the war. It should be organized by NATO. Another way of saying we shouldn't do it, NATO should do it. Well, you support Ukraine's accession to the EU and NATO, but you're not prepared for the EU, but you have to end the war first, and then we can cooperate with Ukraine, but you're not ready for the EU. So it's not something that I'm looking at and thinking, oh, he's going to be a great guy, but he might turn out to be neutral. Babis's Czech election victory poses potential headache for Brussels and Kyiv. So here's it. This is in Radio Free Europe. Right-wing populist Babis, he campaigned on vows to slash support for Ukraine and confront the EU over immigration and environmental policies. Triumphant Babis said that after the results came in, he would seek one-party minority government, though he would hold talks with two small parties, including the far-right SPD, that could give him a majority in parliament. I'm not sure how you do a minority government, but I don't quite understand their parliamentary system. Still, the 71-year-old leader may not totally align with Budapest and Bratislava, giving some hope that Brussels may be able to work with Prague on some level, because it does look kind of bad. Like, it looks like there's a realignment, and I'll show you that in a moment. Let me show you this. President of Serbia, Vučić, everyone is preparing for conflicts. To be completely honest, everyone is getting ready for war. The only question is which side someone belongs to, and we would like to avoid all wars. We would like to avoid conflicts, but I'm afraid no one wants to listen to anyone anymore. Everyone is really seriously preparing for wars. Now, he's ideologically more aligned with Russia than anyone else. The Serbians have generally been aligned with Russia. In fact, their flag is just the reverse of the Russian flag. It's upside down. And they tend to be on the same kind of page about things. So here's what we have. Ukraine, we have Russia over here, and not Poland, I don't know what. Russia's over here, Ukraine's here, and then we have Slovakia and Hungary that are kind of aligned as far as Europe goes with many Russian kind of policies. And then I think Czechia is now, well, checkered. It's kind of mixed. We don't know what they're going to be, whether they're going to actually be aligned with the West or whether it's just an open question. Okay, now, you know what's going on in Georgia and the protests there. This is in Georgia. Not only Georgia protesting the Russian-backed government, large-scale demonstrations on the Russian-backed Hungarian government today. Now, remember, Orbán is facing re-election in February. So we're going to keep our eye on that, because maybe something will flip with Orbán in February. We just don't know how that'll work. Okay, next big story. Ukraine's intelligence service says that China shared satellite data with Russia for missile strikes on Ukraine, including on its hits on foreign-owned sites. These satellites, Yogan 33, Yogan 33-03, and Yogan 33-04, may have been conducting reconnaissance for the Russians during their overflights over Ukraine. They may have been, but they may not have been. So when you see articles or information like this, just take it with a grain of salt until you have something proven. Okay, I'll show you another one that's kind of like this in a little bit. Maybe the Chinese are, and I don't think the Chinese want the Russians to lose, but they don't necessarily want them to win either. So, okay. Then here's another interesting story. Overnight, 25 smuggling balloons crossed from Belarus into Lithuania. The incident came amid temporary shutdowns of Vilnius airport due to suspicious aerial objects. And so you're thinking, oh, was it the Russians? Well, Lithuanian authorities reported 25 meteorological balloons crossed the border from Belarus overnight. Such devices are often used by smugglers to transport cigarettes. And it turns out around 18,000 packs of cigarettes were seized during this unusual tobacco drop. So, okay, so you can't, I mean, your first thought, if it went to the Russians, I understand, but it's not always that. Okay, a fragment of a Russian missile, likely a KH-101, was found in a residential area of Lviv following last night's massive attack. I saw that this morning. And then I saw this. Well, it turns out the missile fragment in Lviv was shown by the Ukrainian media earlier, turned out to be part of an old ventilation pipe, according to the city's mayor. Okay, so, and again, this is in Lviv. This is the city's mayor in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. So it's not like what the Russians do. But sometimes just during the fog of war, look, it was first reported 700 missiles and drones. Last night, it turned out to be 550. I get that they couldn't quite see exactly what it was initially, but you correct it when you see it. Okay. A few months ago, now this is an interesting story. Steve Witkoff, remember him? A few months ago, I published this is someone who is just tracking what's going on with Ukrainian security and that sort of thing. A few months ago, I published a post saying that something felt off. Trump's special envoy Witkoff didn't have his own translator with him and seemed to rely on an unknown interpreter provided to him in Russia. This is not what you do in high-level negotiations. You don't rely on somebody providing you the translator, as a translator is a mission-critical resource. Even the New York Post, allegedly Trump's favorite news outlet, featured my post. Okay, here's what really happened. Steve Witkoff did use a translator, provided upon arrival, and an individual turned out to be a Russian spy, a strategic and significant mistake in such negotiations, either incompetent or completely trusting the other party, not good in any way. And then here's an actual explanation of what happened at the time. Listen to this.
Putin and two of his advisors were present. And there was only one other person sitting on the other side of the table. It was a woman. Witkoff turned to her, pointed at her, and said, "Interpreter?" Interpreter? She said, "Mm-hmm." He followed with a question, "From the embassy?"
From the embassy.
Putin must be loving this, right? From the embassy? Yeah, it's from the embassy. We didn't say which one.
Okay. Now, let's stop here for a second. The only thing that makes sense here is that he probably thought this was a woman sent by the American embassy as an interpreter. There's one problem with that. The woman that he assumed was his interpreter is not just a Russian government interpreter. We can see her next to important Russian figures such as Lavrov, Medvedev, Putin himself over different years, but she also served as Russia's representative and second secretary to the mission to NATO in Brussels. She also served as an advisor to the Russian delegation to the OPCW, the organization.
Yeah, so that was all bad, right? But some of this stuff is just coming out in a significant way. It was speculated before, but it's coming out in earnest now. Okay. Just a few more stories, but they're all interesting. Kadyrov, you remember the Chechen Republic? Kadyrov once again becomes a hero of the Chechen Republic. He awarded himself a second time the title, the hero of the Chechen Republic. Regional government head called Kadyrov a wise and decisive leader under whose guidance the Republic has gone from difficult trials to peace and prosperity. All right. So, I mean, second time since 2023, that's pretty huge, except it's all fraudulent, but he won't be with us very long. It appears he looks like he's, as far as I understand, he's very sick and is trying to turn the reins of power over to his son. Okay. Meanwhile, his commander, Abdi Aludinov, claimed that on Russian TV, that Tomahawks won't help Ukraine because it has already lost, listen to this, nearly 2 billion people. For context, the Earth's entire population is just over 8 billion. Okay, maybe he misspoke. But even if he misspoke, maybe he meant 2 million people. But did Ukraine really lose 2 million people? But that's what the Russians keep talking about. So even in his misspeaking, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He meant to say 2 million. Yeah, it's still not 2 million. So, okay, but that's a standard Russian talking point. Kremlin's domestic propaganda machine gets ahead of the curve in dealing with a looming, inevitable public concern over Russia bringing back horseback cavalry, because they're going to just move across the range and avoid the drones. They're not going to avoid the drones. They're going to be just devastated. But Radio Sputnik is discussing the merit of using horses in combat. Now, I haven't talked about Iryna, the Ukrainian woman who was tragically murdered on a subway in Charlotte, North Carolina. But there's now an Iryna Law adopted in the U.S. in memory of this murdered Ukrainian woman. North Carolina has passed the so-called Iryna Law. She was killed in a subway attack by a repeat offender suffering from mental illness. The bill was signed by the governor. It was bipartisan. Both Republicans and Democrats signed it in a very large way. Lawmakers say it's meant to protect the public from individuals who pose a heightened risk of violence. Never should have happened. But again, it would keep higher sentences for somebody who's really going to be a potential risk. It's tragic. And I didn't talk about it at the time because it was like, the reason that it was being talked about was because for political points unrelated to Ukraine, and it was kind of sad that it was being used that way. Last big story, a priest of the Russian Orthodox Church openly calling to genocide the people of Ukraine. And you wonder why the Ukrainians don't like the Russian Orthodox Church. It's now being used as it says merely a PR and money laundering arm of the Kremlin. It's not that, but it is that. It's not just that, but it is doing that as well. So here's the priest saying, you see, in Ukraine, the disease is so advanced that no amount, he's going to continue here, of negotiation or permission can cure it. Only surgery is possible there. Therefore, there can be only one response to these Nazi speeches. He's talking about Ukrainians. It must be burned out. Now, I did my master's thesis on the Nazis, and this is the precise way that the same reasoning is what the Nazis said, where they had turned their doctors against individual citizens because they had to cut the cancer out of the state. Some will say, oh, that's not Christian. It's entirely Christian, he says. No, it's not. These are the same people position themselves as pagans, and they will be treated as pagans. For you, it's not the New Testament ethics, but Old Testament ethics. Elijah the prophet, who took it upon himself to personally slit the throat of 3,000 servants of Baal, and at the same time must be done with these people to destroy them without any hesitation. You see, in Ukraine, the disease is so advanced. Okay, so, I mean, he's just twisting the scriptures in such unbelievable ways. This makes my blood boil. But this is why when you hear, oh, they banned the entire religion, well, they don't want the FSB controlling a church and then having that infect the population. This is what they're dealing with. All right, my friends. My shout out is to Eric Peterson, a colleague, Patreon member. Thank you, Eric, for that. And I just want to say thank you all for being with me still. I know that's 10 stories is a lot to cover, but these were some really important stories to get some context about what's going on. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.